Howdy Hexers, Infamous Neo here. Welcome to Limit Break. This series talks about how to improve your game in Limited with a focus on what will be true for Sealed. This week I managed to take first place in the Clash, so today we're going to take a look at the deck I used to get me to the top 8 and why it worked. Here is the full list. It's a Ruby Wild troop based list using Grandfather Elk as the champion. If you count the conscript actions as troops, we have 17 troops, 6 actions, 9 Wild Shards, and 8 Ruby Shards. We have a couple of rares in here, one being Earth Mother and the other being Commander Prompt. Prompt was obviously great when he showed up, giving +2 attack to exhausted troops and +2 defense to ready ones. He is a huge defensive and offensive boon, and on top of that, he's really hard to kill. Earth Mother, on the other hand, was not so great. Honestly, it was probably a mistake to include this card. I ended up taking it out almost every game for Feral Root Tactics or Rust and Ruin. Likely, Feral Root Tactics should have been main decked instead of Earth Mother. The biggest takeaway here though is that you don't need massive luck with your rares and legendary cards to top 8 one of these events. For all intents and purposes, I had one bomb rare. My commons and uncommons were really the true stars of the show. So, let's start at the top and talk about each of the cards in my deck individually, why they're there, and why they worked. Boisterous Ballad is just a good card, but because it's random, we can't really talk too much about any synergy it may have. You don't know what you're going to get, but as a card in the opening hand, or one you'll draw later, it's generally pretty darn good. A solid troop to start the game is most likely the case, but it can also serve as a surprise speed damage troop later on. Your opponent may leave enough blockers up to block what you currently have on the board, but not consider the fact you might draw a speed troop and add additional damage to the board state. Stalagmage is a nice opener for a deck that just wants to swing in. If your opponent doesn't put a blocker down until turn 3, or stumbles in any way, Stalagmage can really take advantage of that. The only real synergy here though is with Blitz. Later in the game, when you can't swing in with it, you can use it to activate the mobilize effect of Blitz. This will not only reduce the cost of Blitz, but also give you that extra 2 damage when the Stalagmage readies next turn. Ayatachi Cavalry was a bit of a star honestly. It's a 2/2 for 2 that if it becomes Valorous, it can't be blocked by troops that aren't also Valorous. There is limited Valor generation in most decks, so a lot of the time once this guy had a Valor on him, he became a 3/3 that just hit face every turn. Pair that with Prompt and you have a 6/3 unblockable that is a must answer in nearly all cases. Battle Preparations is similar to Boisterous Ballad. It's random, so it's hard to mention any real synergy, but for 2, it creates a 1-cost Ardent troop with +2/+2, and this usually results in you having a troop with bigger stats than you could normally get for 3 cost. Now, this isn't true every single time, but the chances are pretty good. It's a great play on 2, it's a great play on 3, and it's not bad as a draw later in the game either. Not much to say about Determined Bushi, it's just here because it's a very efficient card. It's a 2/2 for 2 that gets bigger every time it readies. It's got Crush, so the bigger it gets, the better. This makes it a great target for Valors and a great target for Blitz. Plus, if you're having trouble getting it through, you can use Elk to give it the push it needs. Ruby's Favor worked out really well for me too. I only used 2 of its effects in the entire tournament. I finished a game or 2 with the 3 damage, and there was one match in particular where its ability to make my opponent sacrifice an artifact was very clutch. I ran into an opponent who had both Dread Transport in his deck and Drew's Ironclad Roller. Ruby's Favor, together with Rust and Ruin from my reserves, helped me to take this match down. Crackling Clash was another card that was incredible. This card is absolutely fantastic in an Elk deck. Giving a troop +3/+3 with your charge power, and then having it battle another troop with Clash can basically take out anything in the game. I even took out that same Drew's Ironclad Roller with an Elk Crackling Clash combo. It's good for taking out small threats, and with Elk, it's good for taking out big threats. And the cherry on top of it all is that it gains a charge when you use it. This of course means you're going to get that second Elk activation a turn sooner and potentially finish the game a turn sooner too. Next up is 2 copies of Apprentice Earthcaller. These are 2 3s for 3 that draw a card if you use a Valor on them. This is pretty solid card advantage if you can generate the Valor. Luckily, we had a couple of cards in the pool that could do this, and I'll talk about them now because really my main reason for including them was for the Earthcallers and the Ayatachi Cavalry we spoke about earlier. These cards are Fiend of Nulzahn, Spring Dancer, and Emberleaf Bladesman. Now 2 of these have a minor socket, so we can give them the ability to create a Valor when they are deployed. Spring Dancer can do the same thing, but without the need for a gem. Arendelle Monk is a pretty strong include for an Elk deck. It's a 3/3 for 3, that if it ever manages to exhaust and ready, it becomes a strong 5/5 with Spell Shield. This is pretty hard to deal with. 5/5 is pretty huge in this format, and the best way to deal with cards of this size is usually with removal. The Spell Shield though obviously prevents this from happening. This guy has some pretty decent synergy with Elk too. Playing him on 3 means you can swing for a 6/6 crush on turn 4. Sometimes obviously you won't need to use your charge power, but Elk usually allows this card to swing in and get its diligence online where otherwise it would be impossible. And obviously, once its Spell Shield is online, this guy becomes an amazing target for any Valors you may have lying around. Blitz is the perfect combat trick for this kind of deck. A 3-cost +4/+2 that has the option to be played as a 1-cost card if you exhaust a troop for the Mobilize. It's great to come out on top of a combat trade, but it's particularly potent because we know that we're going to have a Crush troop. Elk means that we can certify that a troop will be dealing damage to our opponent, so often Blitz can close games by pushing through damage from the Crush. I actually ended up with 2 Lava Shaper in my pool. This is the main reason I chose to play this shard combination. This guy will deal 3 damage to a target troop when it resolves if you have another Ardent troop in your hand or on the board. Removing your opponent's troops is obviously great, but doing so while also putting a 3/3 body on the board means that you're taking away one of your opponent's cards without losing any of your own. This is a particularly powerful synergy with a deck that just wants to swing. Normally, you and your opponent will be swinging at each other with what you can, while holding back troops that can't swing or troops that provide more use as a defensive threat. This guy takes out a defender, allowing you to do the thing your deck wants to do, but at the same time, provides you with a blocker. With a removal action, obviously you can remove your opponent's threat, but it doesn't offer you the same kind of presence. Also, it makes losing a troop in order to burn it much less impactful. If I hit into my opponent's 2/4 with my 2/2 and use Feed the Flames for example, I get rid of the troop but I lose 2 cards to make it happen. Doing the same thing but finishing with the Lava Shaper instead essentially means that I only traded the 2/2 for my opponent's 2/4. Call of the Deepwood is a card that could conscript a 5-cost Ardent or Underworld troop, your choice, for 4-cost. This card can be pretty powerful. I hit Bowie Starlight at one point during the Swiss. Generally speaking though, this card will create a powerful troop when you play it. There are a few duds like Prairie Trapper. Most of the time though, you're going to hit something that's much better than what you should have for the cost you paid. I decided to include 2 Explosive Interludes in my deck. This card can deal 5 damage to a troop, and if you have Ardent Allegiance, it will also create a Valor. This card was key to me winning many games, dealing with my opponent's big bombs or cards that I couldn't get around easily. The Valor it makes also makes it have additional value in this deck. We spoke about the Earthcallers in Cavalry earlier, and while this card is costly, it can deal with most threats, and the additional value from the synergy with my deck really tipped me over the edge on playing 2 instead of 1. My final main deck card was a Howling Plains Runner. He's a 5/5 with Crush that creates a Valor if he deals damage to the opponent. We know why Valors are good for my deck, we spoke about that earlier, but honestly, this guy only became useful for that reason a couple of times. Most of the time it was his large body and Crush that was most effective. He stabilized in games where I was in a rough patch, and his massive frame will store all but the mightiest of opposing troops, and his Crush makes him a fantastic candidate for closing games. He wasn't the MVP, but I'm certainly glad he was in my deck in most games. Over the course of the day, of course, I faced mostly Ada. 6 of my 9 matches were against her, 1 Theros, 1 Takahiro, and 1 High Cleric Marzel, taking 2 losses in round 7 and round 9, both to Ada decks. These matches were both close 2-1s though, and they had quite similar games to the rest of the Ada matches I played that day. The main reasons I wanted to share this deck with you guys is of course because I have some unique insight into it having played it for 9 rounds, but also it's not insane or overpowered. It's a good deck, but most of the power comes from the common and uncommon cards. While luck is certainly a factor in Sealed, you don't need an insanely overpowered pool of rares and legendaries to place highly in these events. Your knowledge of cards and deck building skill go a long way to make up for lack of bombs, and sometimes even if you have a bomb rare or legendary, you might not want to play the deck that uses them. Keep your eyes out and make sure to take a good look at your pool. That's all for this week, guys. Let me know your thoughts on this archetype. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel or see the last video by using the links on the screen now. Also, if you feel like hanging out, I'll be streaming nearly every day on Twitch, so check out the link below the video. Good luck, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.